I call Tim McIndoe.
Mr. Speaker, I have heard racing commentaries that were slower and less excitable and less intense than that contribution. I can only assume that Miss Dalziel must moonlight at Riccarton Racecourse on a Saturday afternoon. What an entertaining... Thank you, Mr. Williamson. What an entertaining, if slightly angry tirade that was from the former Minister of Commerce. A breathless contribution. But methinks, Mr. Speaker, that it was a lot of sound and fury signifying nothing. Mr. Speaker, I was pleased to speak in the first reading of the Regulatory Reform Bill in this House on Tuesday afternoon, and I'm equally pleased to speak today in support of this important companion measure, the Regulatory Reform Repeals Bill. And again, I congratulate the Minister and his team of officials for the work that they have done in bringing it to its first reading in this House. Again, I make the point that this bill is a significant part of the government's strategy to lift New Zealand's long-term economic growth, create jobs, boost incomes, raise living standards and provide world-class public services. The explosion of bureaucracy and red tape that occurred under the Labor administration in the first decade of this century has had disastrous consequences for productivity and jobs in New Zealand. That's why the National-led government is determined to reverse the trend and overcome the problem. It's why the government made two clear commitments in its statement on regulations which were released in August 2009. Those commitments are, firstly, that we will introduce new regulations only when we are satisfied that they are required, reasonable and robust. And secondly, that we will review existing regulation in order to identify and remove requirements that are unnecessary, ineffective or excessively costly. This particular bill will repeal 31 acts that have been identified as redundant, as was envisaged when the government's statement on regulations contained the pledge to identify and remove requirements that are unnecessary, ineffective or excessively costly. Some of the acts identified for repeal, which we've just heard from Ms Dalziel, are even older than most of the members opposite, and like those members, have long since ceased serving any useful purpose. Some specific examples were read out to us by Ms Dalziel, and they also include the Aid to Water Power Works Act of 1910 and the District Railways Purchasing Act of 1885. I think at least one of those measures was passed when Ms Dalziel was a junior member of this House, so I understand that she may feel some grief at its passing, not to mention that party's apparent reluctance to see any red tape removed from our statute books and regulations. But it's well past time that they went. And there is a very serious purpose to this measure, as the repeal of the 31 redundant acts will minimise the potential for confusion that firms and individuals may experience. As a government, we are working to ensure that the statute books are up to date, easy to comprehend and fit for purpose. Under the government's statement on regulations, ministers are required to certify that all new regulation is consistent with the two principles I mentioned a moment ago. Their departments are required to provide annual regulatory plans of all known and anticipated proposals to introduce, repeal or review legislation or regulation. And to assist in that aim, and an example can be seen in the 31 acts that have been identified for repeal in this bill, a process of scanning has been adopted. This scanning process will be followed by all departments who have been directed to look over their stock of legislation and regulations that they manage and assess whether they are still needed, efficient and proportionate. So this initiative of the current government is designed to minimise the burden of regulation placed on individuals and firms, and there's no doubt in my mind that it will be a significant and widely welcomed procedure. Mr Speaker, notwithstanding the extraordinary contribution we heard a moment ago, I anticipate that this is a measure that will enjoy broad cross-party support in this House, and so for that reason I commend it to the House and say let's get on with it and let's not have quite so much excitable nonsense as a red herring.
Call the Honourable David Parker.